Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Fireside Chat with Sister Helen Prejean. We're so happy you are joining us. We'll give folks a few more seconds to kind of trickle in here. But hopefully, if you are not seated physically by a fireside right now, at least you are there spiritually, emotionally, mentally for this evening's discussion. And please make yourself comfortable. With Sister Helen, of course, this will be an excellent hour spent together, and I'm excited to get to be a part of this with you all. My name is Emma Tacky, and I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement for Catholic Mobilizing Network. And we'll just go over a few housekeeping items before we go in. Please go ahead and introduce yourself into the chat. What, your name, where you're coming from. And as we settle in, please keep your video on if you're able to. Of course, take care of yourself as needed, but the discussion is so much more vibrant when we can see each other's faces. And then you are all muted just for the sake of us, wanting to hear Sister Helen and Dick Dieter this evening. And then Leslie will be putting in our participant guidelines into the chat. And please, as a form of respect for this community this evening and for protecting ourselves, please do not share our Zoom link for this evening's discussion. Like I said, my name is Emma, and I will be screen sharing. But if you need to chat myself or Leslie for any technical questions or issues that come up, please feel free to do so. And of course, a big thank you to our sponsors of this conference, particularly the Roman Catholic Diocese of San Diego and the University of San Diego Center for Restorative Justice, who have been phenomenal partners in planning and hosting this conference. And wonderful, I would say so far, so good. I hope you all agree. And without further ado, let me introduce our moderator and leader of this discussion for this evening, which is Richard Dieter, who serves on the board of directors of Catholic Mobilizing Network, as well as Witness to Innocence. And he served as the executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center in Washington, D.C. from 1992 until 2015. And he has done so much with his career in terms of research on and speaking about the death penalty. And his further bio is on our conference website. But without further ado, let me hand it off to Dick, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Emma. It's really a privilege to be part of this special sharing with Sister Helen tonight. We're not all in the same room. I do welcome you into my living room and sitting around my fireplace for a while. But I think the forum is going to give us an opportunity to hear Helen's stories, for you to ask questions, which you can do through the chat of her. This is a rare opportunity. She flies around so much, it's hard to get her in one place, but we have her here tonight, and I couldn't be happier. I think Sister Helen is someone who doesn't need my introduction. She's probably better known to this community, but she's known all around the world. She's known as a best-selling author, the recipient of more awards than I could mention in this time, and as one of the leading spokespersons on the death penalty in this century and even beyond. And the impact that she has had, both of us have been in this movement for many years, and we've seen the changes. And believe me, the changes have been due in great part to something called Sister Helen Prejean and Dead Man Walking. So I don't want to embarrass her with anything more. But I just want to ask you, Helen, how are you doing? I know that you do travel a lot, and then this past year, past 6 months at least, you haven't been able to. And also know you just were hit with a hurricane down there in New Orleans. So just bring us up to speed on what your life has been like lately.
Sure. Oh, great discovery. I was on the road September to May since 1993, when Dead Man Walking came out. I had no idea what a book would do. I didn't think of a book as very powerful because I'm Cajun. I'm from Louisiana. We talk to each other. And a book seemed passive to me. It just sits there on a shelf, and nothing's better than talking, right? But anyway, so I write this book, and kaboom, then there's a movie, then there's an opera, and it put me on the road. I read the epistles of St. Paul with a whole new meaning, because he got out there, and you literally got on planes and went to every state, cities, in and out of cities. Big discovery. March 12th, I come home from Colorado, and I haven't been on a plane since, and I'm home, and I think, wow, this is going to be a quiet, contemplative time. And it is, in a lot of ways, coming back to Louisiana, not having to get on the road. You know, when you're doing something because you got to do it, you're not in touch with how much it's really costing you till you can step away and go, wow, I don't have to do that anymore. I got a bird feeder. I'm cooking good Southern food, and I'm able to pray and think, and then surprise. People started coming into me because of Zoom, that now I can be present. Just this past week, I've been in 3 different states, different universities, with different groups, a whole group of people that do mitigation in these cases to save people from the death penalty. I get to be with people in just such a new way. And so it's been a surprise that I've been as busy as I am, but also that I can just be home. And it's delicious to be able to not have to get on the road. I'll go again when it's time. But so I'm loving this. And you know what? I find this Zoom thing pretty dynamic, because we're going to be engaged with each other. Your questions are every bit as important, and what you want to talk about is what I'm going to present. And so we want to make sure we leave enough time for that, okay? So that we can really have back and forth. So how's that for a start, Mr. Dieter?
I'd give you maybe an A- on that. That's pretty good.
Things are sweeter with Dieter.
We want more. We want more. That's why I'm holding back the A+ yet. So no. Listen, it's hard to believe, but there's probably people participating on this Zoom call who weren't born when Dead Man Walking came out.
Uh-huh.
It's possible, at least. I remember reading Dead Man Walking very, very clearly. It was maybe in your mind another book on the death penalty, and maybe at first that's what I thought too. But there were some insights in it that I hadn't heard before. And one of those things was, as you were visiting the Patrick Sonnier and others on death row, some getting close to execution, and that seemed to be your main work. And I had heard of others who did work like that, Joe Engel and others, early on. But then I heard you talk about meeting Lloyd LeBlanc and the Harvey families. That these are the families of the victims in the underlying murder in some of the cases you worked on. And you had an insight that I wish you'd share. Perhaps some have read it in the book, and maybe we're just wanting to get to some other parts. But I think it's critical, and I think a lot has changed since you brought that insight of working with the families to the rest of us. Could you talk about how that happened and what kind of a change that was for you?
Right. And you got to know what a good editor I had for Dead Man Walking. I had Jason Epstein. He was the managing editor of Random House. He really helped me shape the book of Dead Man Walking. And if I hadn't had Jason, you never would have heard of the book. And one of the key things he helped me see, a big mistake I made was 2 teenage kids had been killed. And they were found lying dead in a harvested sugarcane field in a little place called New Iberia. Bullet holes in the backs of their heads. A girl had been raped. Unspeakably terrible. One 17, one 18. And the 17-year-old was David LeBlanc, the son of Lloyd LeBlanc. And Lloyd LeBlanc really is the hero of Dead Men Walking, his journey, his spiritual journey. I'm the storyteller. And I made this big mistake in the beginning. And it was that I didn't know what to do with victims' families. Here I am. I can't believe this man's going to be executed. I'm learning about human rights. I'm learning how the courts work. I'm learning what happens to poor people and all that. And so, and especially the girl's family, the father was so angry, and he was giving press conferences and saying how he wanted to pull the switch. And all I could see was this white hot anger. And I thought of going to visit him. I thought of it. And then I thought, oh, and I'm the last one in the world they're going to want to see. I'm the spiritual advisor to the two people who killed their children. And everybody was Catholic in this. Pat Saunier and his brother, the LeBlancs, the Bourques, whose children were killed, me, the nun, and I stayed away from them. And I met Lloyd LeBlanc at the pardon board hearing a week before Pat was executed. And that's the first time I met them. And it couldn't have been more polarized. What are you doing at the pardon board here? You're either saying you want the person to live, you want the person to die. And I'm there with a lawyer to just ask that Pat not be executed. And I ran into Lloyd LeBlanc and his wife walking outside the building while the pardon board was behind closed doors voting. And he walked right up to me. And he goes, Sister Helen, I'm Lloyd LeBlanc. This is my wife. Sister, it's our son who was killed. Sister, all this time, you've been visiting with those two brothers and you didn't once come see us. I've had nobody to talk to, and you can't believe the pressure we under with this death penalty thing. And he had just been the one at the pardon board meeting to stand up and speak for both families that they wanted the execution to proceed. And now he's looking in my eyes saying, Sister, where you been? And I was so wrong. And I call him the hero because he said, Sister, I'll pray in this little chapel. Come pray with me. You need to see what we've been going through. I didn't initiate it. He initiated it. And then through going to pray with him, and we prayed the rosary together. He kept vigil before the Blessed Sacrament from 4 to 5 in the morning on Fridays. And I would drive out there to be with him and to pray with him. And that's where the exchanging and the sharing of hearts and journeys really began. And I call him the hero because he taught me what forgiveness really means. And in his own journey, because he was so angry at the death of David. He loved his son so much. And then suddenly his son's gone. And he almost lost his wife, who almost grieved to death. And now here he is. And he said, Sister, I've always been kind. I've always loved to help people. I'm good with my hands. I can fix things. And I was losing it. I was angry all the time. I'm snapping at my wife, making her cry. The poor woman's already in such pain. And he just prayed, Jesus, you gotta help me. You gotta help me. And then he got in touch with it. And he just said, I'm losing who I really am. I'm consumed with this anger at them, just thinking what I want to do to them. And then when he told me this moment of grace, when he got it, and he put his hand out like this, and he just said, then I said, They killed a boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. I'm going to do what Jesus said. And he started going down the road. I had never even meditated on the word forgive, to give before, not to let the love in you and who you are be overtaken by the hatred. You give before. So, and he was embodying that. Mrs. Saunier couldn't even go out in the town of St. Martinville because everybody knew her as the mother, that her sons had committed this terrible murder. She couldn't go to the store. She'd overhear people saying, there she is, that white trash woman. She's the mother of the murderers. And she hears somebody on her front porch one day and looks through the blinds because she had all the windows shut and all the blinds, and sees a man there holding a basket of fruit and opens the door. That's Lloyd LeBlanc. And he made his way full circle to look what his mother is suffering. And he goes and he visits her. And he says, Miss Sonia, I know you're having a hard time in this town. He said, look, I'm a parent just like you. And as parents, we don't really know what our children might do. I don't hold you responsible for what your sons did. And here's my number. If you need me, you call me. I was there at her funeral. He was there at her funeral. And he's the hero. He's the one who went on that journey. And see, what's so wrong about what prosecutors do with the death penalty is they try to manipulate that the reason they're doing it is to give justice to the victims' families. They just manipulate it that way to make it, to justify, I think, to give their most noble reason for what they're doing. They're causing another whole family pain, of course. And victims' families are also waking up to the fact that they're going to wait 15 or 20 years to be escorted in to watch the state kill the one who killed their loved one, and watching that violence isn't going to heal them a bit, much less waiting all those years for this so-called justice to happen. So Lloyd LeBlanc, I hold him up in every talk I give. He's the Jesus man. He's the Christ figure. And he's the one who points the way to restorative justice and to healing, and not to just imitate the most terrible behavior by saying, you suffered a loss, or you watch, we're going to kill the one who killed your loved one. And you watch that and you're going to be healed.
Well, thank you for all of that, especially the way you kind of just relived it. It seems to me that the feeling came through. Certainly, he was one of the key people in the story, but I thank you for telling the story, and you're telling it in such a way that murder victims' families were starting to be recognized, and the idea of bringing people together when harm has been done, and instead of putting them in the camps of you're for it, you're against it, or execute him, or spare him, or what, and never the twain shall meet. We needed to make a turn. The effort against the death penalty kind of was very polarized and not making a whole lot of progress. As a matter of fact, when that book came out, the death penalty was expanding by measures that are hard to realize today when it's decreasing. But let me go one historical step further. After the book, of course, there was the movie Dead Man Walking, and then the opera, both of which I had the pleasure to see, and a few other presentations of it in different school forums, etc. One of the characters in the film is played by Sean Penn. And I think he might be a conglomerate of some of the cases that you worked on. But in any case, he did an excellent job, I thought, maybe as award-winning as Susan Sarandon did in playing you. But he did an excellent job of being someone you don't like, and you don't want to spend time trying to reconcile with or restore justice with. I'm wondering if you have any insights for people working on restorative justice, whether they be victims of crime themselves, or their families were victims, or parish workers or other, where there seems to be just no give and take on the side of those who committed the crimes. No remorse, no really interest in talking to others or communicating, because they're still angry, whatever reasons. But how do you get past, or do you get past some of those hurdles? How did you achieve any breakthroughs with your visits with the death row inmates who at first resisted this? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that if you wish.
The first thing you got to understand about death row inmates is that over 90% of them were abused in some way as children. They came from violent backgrounds. That's the first thing to understand. A number of them are mentally ill, or suffer from, intellectual disability in some way. I've never met and all the 6 people I've accompanied and the 7th man that I'm visiting now on death row, this kind of crystallized evil murderer who just is not sorry. And I've never met that person. See, that's an absolutized version that comes from prosecutors. Even in the mentality of the Supreme Court that gave us the death penalty, depending on the criteria, first of all, of the worst, actually set that as a criteria for the people that we're going to be able to execute. What does that mean? Worst of the worst. And it's trying to take out all the murders. Now we're going to siphon off the worst of the worst, either by the nature of their character. They have killed, they will kill again. We can't trust to put them in prison. They'll kill other inmates, they'll kill guards. They are the worst of the worst. Those are abstractions that we have laid on human beings, and everybody is a mix and within themselves, and everybody is worth more than the worst thing they've ever done. So I haven't experienced these people that are just so, and everybody that I visited is just so glad to have a human being who comes to visit them. Because often they're families, they live far away, they're poor, they don't have transportation, and they are alone. And I go to visit them. And if we want to talk about restorative justice for anybody, for somebody with victims' family, they need people by their side. They need other human beings coming and accompanying them and holding their hand, as they sit there with them and receive their tears and let them talk about what has happened to them. Community, being there with each other, is the first step to healing, not just from people who've done terrible crimes. And imagine waking up in a cell every morning where you get 1,000 signals of everybody around you that you are nothing more than disposable human waste. And you are so hated, we are going to kill you. Imagine trying to maintain any kind of dignity you have as a person in that kind of hatred. And that's what's so good about Kairos retreats, going into prisons, visits, prayer groups that go in to pray with people. Imagine that you're in prison, and one of the first rules of prison is you don't share your vulnerable side with anybody. You protect yourself. You don't trust anybody. And imagine being part of a retreat where actually a community of people surround you for the space of a weekend, and where you can entrust your vulnerable self and be that with that group and be safe and be received and be loved. Imagine what that does in terms of restoring your soul and dignity. So one of the first things we have to do is get this image out of our mind of these people, that they are so terrible and they're intractable and they've done it once and they'll do it again. I haven't met any people like that. Some people really are damaged. Their wiring is screwed up, and they have killed, and they are in the first job of a prison is to have different sections of the prison where you have those that are danger to others and to themselves. What's interesting is in 1972, and Dick, you may have the statistics on this better than me, but in 72, when the Supreme Court overturned the death penalty and found it unconstitutional in Furman, there were a whole number of people already on death row, and they were released. I mean, from their death sentences. I don't remember how many it was. Do you remember that, Dick?
It was close to 600 inmates at that time. Surprisingly, a lot smaller than we have now. But
yeah, well, anyway, and all 600 of those people in one fell swoop, their death sentences were overturned. They went in to serve life sentences, and most of them got out. And go look at the track record of those people, these people that are inborn killers. They were all there for murder. That's who they are. And look how many of them, when they got out of prison, which I think was almost all of them, and what happened to them afterwards. And most of them didn't begin to do anything. Not only not murder, but they were law-abiding citizens for the most part. So this thing and see, prosecutors and people in politics needed to have that demonizing of people. And you just notice how the demonizing happens in other things, like immigrants being called racist, rapist and drug lords and coming into our country, and demonizing of the enemy is the first thing you do to have a separation so compassionate as possible, and we can kill people and we can torture them. And I think that's happened But now, as we awaken in this country, first of all, we're awakening to systemic racism. And the way you really see it with the death penalty, and you know this really well, Dick, you could probably talk to us a little bit about this. How is the application of the death penalty racist? You look on death row, it looks pretty close to 50-50, people of color, white people. Why you want to call it racist? Looks pretty fair, don't you think? So you can be in on this fireside chat a little bit.
Well, I'll be crowding things out here, but let me just say a quick couple things. One is you're absolutely right about the group of people in 1972 who were all commuted. As you said, the sentence that they received after being commuted from death was life. Today, it would be almost exclusively life without parole. So that's another whole issue. But because they were commuted to life, they did have a chance of parole. But not all of them got out, but many did. And actually a study was done, I think it was Professor Marquardt in Texas, who followed up on all of those 600 cases.
Amazing.
And their recidivism rate was smaller than typical prisoners. Their criminal rate was less than society at large, but a number of them stayed in prison. And there he monitored their, behavior in prison. Did they get cited for violence? Did they break rules? And again, they were kind of an exemplary group even within prison. Now, that's not to say they were all angels, but just that our ability to predict future dangerousness, that among the murderers, which is a tough group to start with, we think we can say who are the worst murderers worthy of execution. We don't even come close. What we do is we pick certain people. Now, that comes to your second question that you maybe hint that I should say something about. Who, if you're not picking all the murderers, how do you choose? Well, of course, a lot depends on your lawyer, how good she is, what county you live in. If you lived in Harris County, Texas, or if you lived in Massachusetts or something, the odds are different. But a very big thing that will determine whether you got the death penalty or not is whether you killed a white person.
Absolutely.
That's
8
racism.
out of every 10, at least.
And that's racism. It's not racism, not like you said, death row maybe 50-50, but victims are not. It's not that 50-50 should be the goal.
And 50% or more of homicide victims are people of color. And I learned that when I lived in St. Thomas. The families didn't even expect always that there'd be an investigation. I mean, Shirley Carr had 2 sons killed within 6 months of each other, and it wasn't even investigated by the DA of New Orleans. It didn't care. If you don't care about the life of a person, you're not outraged over their death, and you're not going to seek an ultimate penalty. You got to care about the victim. You have to, understand their worth, that you would go to that much trouble to go for the death penalty. The other big and deep flaw, one day we're going to see this, and this is why the Supreme Court does not own the Constitution. The people own the Constitution, and we help interpret the Constitution, and we gradually learn and we change things in our understanding of it. The other deep flaw when the death penalty was put back, because the criteria is so fuzzy, worst of the worst. Well, you kill only one person, but happened to be my mother. I call it the worst of the worst because I only have one mother and she's gone from the earth forever. What could be worse than that? We have no way of applying that criteria in any way that makes sense. So how do you get it to operate? You got to trust the discretion of the prosecutor. You only have death when you have a prosecutor seeking death. And that is what is so horrible about what Attorney General Will Barr, Catholic Attorney General Will Barr, is doing now, cherry picking those on death row and on federal death row to be killed. And so forth. 7 people have been killed, and he just designated 3 more, one of whom is a woman. How did they get picked to die? He chose them. His discretion, his decision. Let's see, death on this, this, and this, even though there had not been an execution on federal death row in 17 years, because the DA before, Eric Holder, wasn't keen on killing people. And so you leave it up to the discretion of an individual who's going to decide whether or not you're going to go for death or not. That's why this thing is so wrong. It has always been wrong. It's always going to be wrong. And it's partly, and we do want to talk, Dick, about the journey of the Catholic Church to reach a position after 1,600 years of dialogue that in no way can we entrust over to government the right to take life for what they decide is the most grievous of crimes. You cannot entrust a government with that right and that authority over life or death to kill their citizens. And it took us that long to reach this position in the official teaching of the Catholic Church. And how did that happen?
Tell us. You're one of the facilitators. You visited the Pope, right?
No. It happens in the people. You have people that have direct, and I'm looking at Bill Pelkey, who's joining us here. You know, his grandmother was killed by Paula Cooper, and this man's story of making his way to forgiveness. I mean, the Bill Pelkeys of this world. And we dialogue with each other. In faith sharing, we share our faith with each other. We just say, hey, I just for the first time visited a prison. Man, I didn't know it was like this. And we change and we grow. And as Vatican II defined, the Catholic Church is the people. People have experiences. And then the prophetic voices start being raised. The Bill Pelkeys who say, Paula Cooper killed my grandmother, but I forgive Paula Cooper. And people hear that and they change. And then that's how it happens. And finally, when it finally bubbles enough up to the top, is then when the catechism gets changed. And you see, there's a tension while this conversation's going on. And so you have people, and in my conversation with Pope John Paul, that was my big question to him. I meet all these Catholics who say they're pro-life. Well, it means they're pro-life for innocent life, but they draw a big line when it comes to guilty life. Yeah, I mean, for unborn children, that you shouldn't do the euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, those are innocents. But does it cross that line and do that crime? I'm all for the death penalty. I call that justice. And I said, Your Holiness, when I'm walking with a man to execution and he's shackled hand and he's been rendered completely defenseless and he's going to be strapped down and he's going to be killed, where does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? What about guilty life? Where's the dignity for somebody who's rendered defenseless and in a protocol, relentless protocol of death is deliberately killed? Is that what we mean by dignity, or do we distinguish between innocent and guilty life? And can you help the church come to a position where we realize that pro-life means not just innocent life, but guilty? And John Paul did a lot. He took it and he pushed it right to the edge. He didn't go all the way because he allowed that there in some cases that could still be permitted, and you cannot have a loophole. When you're talking to governments and prosecutors, you cannot have a loophole. Well, in rare instances or in cases of absolute necessity, which is what the Pope said in the encyclical, The Gospel of Life. You cannot have a loophole because it's going to be quoted as it was by the DA in New Orleans, Harry Connick Sr. Oh, it is an absolute necessity every time we go for the death penalty in New Orleans because it's hard to get a death penalty. Every one we get is an absolute necessity. You got to cut out all the loopholes. And then finally, see that conversation and that dialogue builds. So then you had Pope John Paul II doing his part, you know, when he came to St. Louis in 99. And I think that was either his third visit to the United States or his fourth. The other visits, we had tried to get to him, we of the anti-death penalty group, to say, please acknowledge the death penalty is one of the moral issues. And he had never.
She froze. She did.
First time he put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues, and said no to abortion, no to euthanasia, and no to the death penalty. He acknowledged in court that they cannot acknowledge yet the torture of taking a conscious, imaginative human being and putting him in a holding cage for 15, 20 years and then taking him out and killing him or her. That it is torture. And so here's Pope John Paul in St. Louis, 1999, the death penalty because it's cruel and unnecessary. And then he said the magic words, even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. And notice that in the wording that Pope Francis is using in Fratelli Tutti and what he had done before 2018, under no circumstances can we ever say that a government has the right to take life, no matter how grievous the crime. Because you can never put governments to be the arbiters that this is called grievous, this isn't, and we can be the determiners that you die and you live.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are tremendous insights in there, both for those who focus on the death penalty and those who focus on restorative justice, in terms of no person can ever be stripped of their human dignity, and that should reflect on how we treat them. I do want to try to get to some other questions that people in the...
Yeah, we got 73 people in the chat room. Let's start getting to them.
All right, here we go. This is from Father Eugene. How do you balance your presence, spiritual care, and pastoral care for the victim's family and, he says, the person who caused the harm? How do you how do you achieve a balance without making yourself go into two worlds?
No, well, one of the first things to realize, like the man I'm accompanying now on death row, Manuel Ortiz, he's number 7. He's the third innocent one out of the 7. When I visit with Manuel Ortiz, it is a spiritual exercise. I'm meeting with a man who is going on 30 years, and he's an innocent. I call him my Nelson Mandela, and he teaches me. So it's not like I'm going pouring myself out on this wretch, this criminal. I'm being fed as well. And we have to, in everyone that we serve and are with, that we get the nurture back. If it's not a mutual thing that's going on, and we're the great Savior going in and pouring ourselves on these wretches, because we sit at the feet of each other, we learn from each other. So Manuel, so I just want to say, in balancing my life, I make sure that it has a healthy balance in it, you know, of being able to rest, being able to meditate, being able to play cards with my friends and maybe have a beer and play cards. I have a bird feeder. I read books. I love going, seeing films. It's just a whole life, but staying true, because I've been awakened. I wrote this book, River of Fire, and I'm doing a lot of meetings with universities and groups and talking about this journey of waking up to justice. I was 40 blooming years old before I realized that the gospel of Jesus called me not just to be charitable to the people around me and to pray for poor people, but to be in there and be a part of being part of justice. So the waking up thing is such a grace, and I'm still so grateful for that. So anyway, these are some of the ways I balance myself. And thank you, Father Eugene, for that question. It's a really good one. And all of us got to do that, right? All of us have to do that.
Yes. Let me go to another one here. As your story conveys, the person asks, we Catholics, if truly universal, come in all shapes and backgrounds. How is the foundational seamless garment approach to being pro-life conveyed to both our clergy and laity alike, who are only pushing and voting for one life issue?
Well, there is real work. There's real tilling of the soil going on this. Pope Francis himself has taken that word pro-life and started with the unborn, but then after the child is born, what if the child is born into poverty? Taking it, and what are we doing for the woman who has to make that decision and bear the brunt of the consequences of having another child? Pro-life, we had the health care for everyone, the immigrants, the asylum seekers on the border. And he's taken pro-life and extended it across to all of the issues. And to say that we're pro-life and just cordon off one, and then after the child is born, there just doesn't seem to be concern about what happens afterwards. So it's being expanded. The discussion now is really being broadened. And I think we're going to come to a deeper, better place. I just heard Joan Chittister talk about it, that we had the nuns on the bus town hall meeting the other night. And it's so great to hear old Joan Chittister out there and just taking pro-life and just say, expand it across the board. What does it mean to be truly pro-life? Economic too, fair wages, family leave, just all the things that foster life and don't maim and hurt it. What else we got? Let's try
Here's
to
a
get
very practical question. This person asks, how do the prison authorities treat you when you go to visit death row? And I might add, has that changed over the years?
It can only go up. Believe me. Believe me. And the chaplains too, all the poor chaplains, they shouldn't have been chaplains on death row. They were poor old priests. They should have retired. All they cared about was modesty. I mean, they'd hand out these pamphlets to the death row inmates. This don't sound like a Fireside cartoon, but it is not. Pamphlets about if they're dressing modestly in their cells. I mean, these are people getting ready to be killed by the state. They weren't too happy to see a woman come in. And after I was with Pat Saunier when he was executed, they never had a woman be there at the end. They were supposed, that was their job. And they tried to ban women from being spiritual advisors on death row. And the prison authorities, I've grown to respect them and they've grown to respect me. And it really helped a lot when a movie was made. So they all wanted to be in the movie and they want to be on the good side of things, so it helps. It helps.
Here's an interesting question for you, again, personally. Who or what has surprised you about the public spotlight of your advocacy? What's it like to be a rock star? I think they're asking. Or maybe I've interpreted it incorrectly.
It's you are who you are, and you really do know that. Okay. I think people need, though, to have a hero. I think sometimes they kind of put on me more than I am because they need a hero. I am who I am, right? And I can tell you, it does change things, that it changes the way I look at the mail when it comes in. And you want to respond to people, but you have people writing to you and asking you all kinds of things. Can you help me? I'm having trouble talking to my daughter. In a way, I guess it's a wonderful privilege, and so you just feel like people are putting on you and need you to be maybe more than you are. So you just try to do the right thing and stay faithful to the essential thing, which is that I've been called to accompany these people on death row. I've been called to wake up people about the death penalty and what it is, believing in the goodness of the American people. Even when I stepped out, Dick, of that execution chamber that night when Pat had been executed in the dark, first thing I did was just throw up. I'd never in my life seen anything like this. And I remember thinking about the people, and the gospel passage that came to me was Jesus saying about the crowd that they were like sheep without a shepherd, but that the people were good, but they were being made to be afraid. And they were separated from seeing what it really means to execute a human being. See, there have been 2 court cases at least to try to make executions public, and they've both been defeated. So I had just been brought into a secret ritual. My eyes had seen it. I was a witness. And I just remember thinking about the people in that parking lot outside those gates that night, that the people are good. If we give them a chance and bring them close, they're going to get it. We've got our work cut out for us. And this was 1984. Support for the death penalty in Louisiana was over 90%. Everybody thought what was happening to Pat Saunier was a good thing, but that the hearts of the people are good, and they're not in favor of imitating the worst behavior and killing people. But the job was to persuade them and to bring them there. And that's the way the gospel works. It works through persuasion of people. And so my work was cut out, but I never doubted the goodness of people. And that is what has confirmed my hope, because I can't tell you how many people write to me that read the book or heard me speak or saw the film and just say, I didn't know it was like that. And you have to bring people over to both sides of their own hearts, the outrage over the death to innocent people, and then over to, is this, because the death penalty is about us. Granted, people have done terrible crimes, but are we going to imitate them? It's who are we as a people? And I've been very heartened in that, Dick, in seeing that in the people. And I truly believe, I believe that's happening in our country now, that people are, we have more awareness now of systemic racism that's been going on in the police because we witnessed for 8 minutes and 46 seconds the killing of George Floyd under the knee of a white policeman. And you know what more is being told too of the young 17-year-old girl who held her iPhone with the video camera on that killing, even though that officer, Chauvin, threatened to taser her, said, turn that camera off, turn that off. I'm going to taser you. And that kid kept giving us that picture. And there's this saying in Latin America, what the eye does not see, the heart cannot feel. And now we are up to our earlobes in the conversation and white people understanding about systemic racism in a way that we haven't before. It's a whole new time for our country. And it's not comfortable. And sometimes it erupts in violence in the protests, but we are waking up. And I think we're waking up on a number of things in this country.
I think you hit on something at how working with criminals, working with people on death row has made perhaps you a better person. I know that I can say that about myself. I work a lot with people who were on death row and now are exonerated and have every right to be very angry. I've learned so much.
Yeah, witness to innocence.
I mean, really have learned, you know, their personhood, of course, their struggles, their strength, and, you know, coming back and deciding to work for good with whatever years they have.
I mean, you want to talk about redemption, huh? I mean,
here we go. Let me let's give more time though. Here's this person, I think from Mississippi. I want to start being a vocal advocate for ending the death penalty in Mississippi. Any advice? I'm a Latina Catholic, so a double minority here in a conservative state. And sometimes I feel alone, but want to start standing up more for those in need. Daisy.
Daisy, first thing you do is you go find a group in Mississippi, Mississippians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, or a group to abolish the death penalty. There are those people already working. And if you can't find them in that, and you go to your, if you're a Catholic, go to your diocese, find out how you can be involved and start writing to people on death row. Start writing letters to prisoners is a huge, huge, huge thing, because when you get that letter, when you're in a cell and you get those 1,000 signals a day that you're nothing, and here comes a letter and it's dignity in it and somebody caring about you. Get involved, write a letter, go to the groups working. They're there. You just got to go find them, or start through the ACLU and just ask, where's the group in Mississippi that's working to educate the people and end the death penalty? See if anything's happening in your church. Sometimes churches have not been the ones on the forefront to end the death penalty. In the beginning of the movement, there was a terrible statistic, y'all. And it was that the more people went to church, the more they believed in the death penalty. There's a lot of misinterpretation of the crucifixion and execution of Jesus. Did you know that just within this past year, Wyoming came within a vote or two of repealing the death penalty, and one of the senators, state legislature, said she was not going to vote to repeal the death penalty because if Jesus hadn't been executed we wouldn't be saved from our sins. What kind of image of God is in there? And that God wants pain and a life for a life. And that the execution of Jesus, what image of a wrathful father demanding the life of his child for his wrath, for his sense of justice to be righted. And people have this crass notion, it's not thought through. And if you want a quick litmus test for who your God is, you just start getting into the death penalty. We have a lot of religious education to do. We have a lot of biblical literacy to do. People don't know squat about the Bible, and they quote and throw biblical quotes at each other, like biblical quarterbacking. Well, here's the part, those that shed blood, by their blood will be shed. But then there's Jesus who said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. And you can go back with biblical quarterbacking forever. We have to get into what the scriptures are really about, and the thrust in Jesus, who clearly made it known. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. We see it in a Bill Pelkey. We see it in a Lloyd DeBlanc. We see it in a Marietta Yeager, whose young daughter was kidnapped and murdered. We have these witnesses among us showing the way, and that's the Jesus way. But poor Jesus. Sometimes I think of Holden Caulfield, you know, that famous quote in Catcher in the Rye. If Jesus could see what was being done in his name today, he'd puke. I mean, at Holden Caulfield, we got to get Jesus right. And we see the weaponizing of religion with like Attorney General Sessions quoting Romans 13 to justify the separation of children from their parents at the border. And he's quoting Romans 13 to justify the US government doing that act of cruelty to separate. There are over 550 children now who permanently separated from their parents, and the parents don't know where they are. Can you imagine a greater agony than that? And justifying it by quoting the scripture? Scalia did the same thing when he was on the Supreme Court, quoting Romans 13. We need to start digging into that Romans 13, because the way that it was interpreted, that God's authority is behind civil authority. So if we make something a law, we have God's authority behind this. So these so-called asylum seekers are coming, and they're coming in illegally, they're breaking the law. They deserve it that their children are taken. It's on them, because we got God's authority behind what we're doing, because we established the law. Whatever's lawful must be of God. Is it? When slavery was the law of the land, you taught a slave to read, you taught a slave to swim. It was against the law. Is that of God? What laws are of God? The way we do our economics, the way we do our taxes. Look at our way of life, where we let capitalism determine so much, the free, so-called free market. Is that a God? And we got to go where the life is. And that's why pro-life and really understanding it is so important. What enhances life? What gives life? What gives people dignity? A fair wage, decent housing. And we wake up. And you know what? Here's the key thing. And this is what I love about what we're doing tonight with CMN. We do it in community. And you want to know what keeps me going? It's community that keeps me going. We cannot do it by ourselves. And so we turn to each other. We blow in the coals of each other when the fire is going down and dampen, and the flame the living flame of faith comes forth again. And we're doing that with each other tonight. That's why this is so precious.
So let me ask you, this is, of course, coming from the audience, but I'm sure you get invited to classrooms, and the teacher may be all gung-ho about ending the death penalty or changing the world in a lot of ways, but her students are, rocks sitting without hearing, and you feel like you're talking to the wall, and you come in, with some of the message that you just conveyed with such spirit and compassion, and you hear that, you see the students. So this person is, how would you encourage young people to take interest in doing this particular ministry? And in other words, not people who are already searching to be voices, but who don't know where they are yet in life. What do you do to inspire younger people to start making this work their work for their life?
Yeah, there's this line from Mary Oliver, and what are you doing with your one wild, precious life? Mm-hmm. Actually, what is inspiring those discussions that's going on with a number of university students right now is River Fire. Because see, it's about a journey, about waking up and finding your passion and then putting your life into it. And so I've just designed this because I can't go and speak in person anymore. And I'm calling it a module. I don't know what else to call it, but there's an introductory Zoom with a class that's going to read River Fire. But they're not just going to read. They're going to read, and it's going to be a silent reading of the book, and they're going to journal as they read. Mm-hmm. And then journaling, it's an interaction with what they're reading. And in the introduction to them, in this, I'm saying to them, sometimes we read a book, but sometimes a book reads us. words come out to us and challenge us and can actually change our lives. So they're reading the book silently and they're journaling. And then the last part of the module will be where I come for the ending Zoom with class. And it will be to respond personally to their questions that have arisen as they've gone through this journey. And I explained to them, I said, in this journal that you're going to be keeping as you're reading, or the book's reading you, is going to be like field notes in your own soul journey of where you are and where you want to go and what your desires are. And that the gift of putting things in the journal is, as you put words out there, they have a different kind of presence that you can look at, like especially as you're sorting out emotions. And this is on anything. Quirky relationships you're trying to work through, emotions you're trying to sort out, ambivalent feelings. You think about things that the art of journaling is a spiritual practice. And so all this, we just are launching this. I just finished the module today and just sent it out to Mount St. Mary's in Los Angeles. We're a teacher working with a group of students. We're going to start doing this model together. So the answer, though, to it is not to so much to give advice to young people, or here's what you must do in your young life if you want to find your passion. It's to tell them stories and tell them stories about myself and what woke me up, and it's keeping on waking me up, because we're no different. We're all just human beings. And it took me a blooming long time to wake up. I was 40 before I got about the gospel and justice. And they're ahead of me.
One more question I'm going to throw at you, and I'll ask you to maybe keep it short because I guess we got a time limit on this. One, are you optimistic about the future, and do you see people in the death penalty world working with people in the restorative justice world, and vice versa? And, you know, how can we all get together on both of these issues? Just
it's
briefly.
not like you have two things here going on. You got the death penalty folks and restorative justice. The first step of restorative justice is to get the government to stop killing people. That's restoring life, and we have to see penal reform as restoring life. We have, do you know what's called the fourth largest city in the United States? Is the 2.3 million people have been thrown into prison, which is a place of exile and punishment and the separation of families. So we all, to restore justice, it's just like we got to stop punishing people by throwing them into exile and punishing them and separating them from their families. We have to restore life. And so we know some of the roads to it is definitely to have alternative drug courts for doing that. Stop making like marijuana, or having a little marijuana in your pocket and you get thrown into prison for 15 years or longer for that. And just the whole thing associated with drugs and nonviolent crimes, and just education. I mean, we definitely know for those in prison that had a minimum amount of education do not go back to prison. So we need to really work with young people in education so they don't go to prison in the first place. All these are ways of restoring life instead of punishing. And so that's the road. Stopping the government from killing people, literally killing them, is just like the very first foundational stone of it. But all of it waits for us to be done. Penal reform.
Thank you. I really thank you, because I felt like I heard some of your insights even better over all these years than the best tonight in a way. They really came through. You still got it.
You got an open heart. Everybody, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but it was great being with all of you.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Oh, folks, before we hop off, I just have
Emma,
final announcements. Sorry to jump in there. Dick, Sister Helen, thank you so much for this discussion and for your time. We are so appreciative of the wisdom that you've given us this evening. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts, of course. Before I let you all go for the evening, just quick final announcements here. In the chat, Leslie is sharing our resource, Mercy in Action, which is an email list you can sign up for from Catholic Mobilizing Network that will give you actions and links to help stop imminent executions. We currently have action alerts going for the 3 federally scheduled executions in November and December. and then the one in Tennessee in December as well. And then I hope you join us on Saturday for Saturday morning's Mass with Bishop David O'Connell, which is at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern. And then, of course, our plenaries and workshops for Saturday as well. And with that, I will stop there and we will see you Saturday. Again, Sister Helen and Dick, thank you so much. And thank
Thanks,
you
Emma.
all for your
Thanks,
questions.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Good talking
you.
to you. Bye, Bill Pelkey. Thank you, Bill Pelkey.
Bye-bye.
God bless.
Thanks, Helen.